Hello and welcome to this very impromptu presentation. And so what I'd like to do here today is essentially to cover Nintendo's Splatoon, what I think they're doing wrong as far as today is concerned, right, as far as this day. And what I'd like to do then is cover my particular recommendations for essentially what they've been doing wrong. And so I'll try to keep a relatively entertaining pace as far as we continue into this, but if I don't, then forgive me. I'm a bit of a slow executor, and so this is a bit of a challenge for me, essentially. But what I would like to do here is essentially, as I mentioned, cover that bit, and this is essentially geared towards Nintendo and their developers and people who play a hand in dealing with what we end up getting as a result in terms of a product and when it comes to Splatoon. And so because of this, I will be using strong language because this is a very heated topic, and well, at least for me it is, and it's something that I've had to deal with since the first game. And so I will be using a couple of strong adult language here and there, so if you're not okay with that, then please navigate away. And just as well, I will be using a couple of jargon that is very technical and not very layman speak. So again, if you're not okay with that, please move away from this and have a good day. Otherwise, if you're totally okay with that and feel inclined to immerse yourself into this discussion, then you are free to do so. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this. So the first thing to cover obviously would be, well, what the heck is the problem? I'm an X rank, I'm a professional in Salmon Run, I win 95% of my matches. What's the issue with this game? Well, to list out basically what I feel is the issue with this game at least at a root level, from a very high level looking at this game, I think what really causes the problems down the line in a chain effect is the fact that this game runs into scope of the developers, namely, run into scope creep early. And for those of you not aware of what scope creep is when you have a project, let's say, and you have particular objectives or deliverables that you planned ahead to have done for that project, right? And in Splatoon's case, that could be a number of stages or a particular set of weapon classes and things like that. And what happens with scope creep is that later on you have met those particular goals or end goals and objectives, but then you decide to include other things that negatively impact the essential deliverables that you've already introduced, the things that you originally planned on. And what happens, obviously, again, is that adversely affects what's already there. So, to me, that this is something that has been prominent since the first game. It's a lot of people would probably argue that it's one of the better things about this game because they only show up so much during launch and then they give us then free updates. That's appealing, right? It's appealing when you put together that marketing free updates, right? Oh, that's great. No other game now offers free DLC. So Splatoon is obviously doing something right because they're offering me free updates. Well, not always the case, my friend. Unfortunately, as it stands, nothing in this world is perfect, right? That just stands to reason. It's a fact of life. And objectively, looking at this from any other shooter's perspective, no other shooter has a perfect type of game either, whether that's balancing, whether that's just the mechanics built into the game, whether that's design flaws. And so Splatoon, then in that line of thinking, Splatoon shares the same kind of flaws that you would find in any game. And so really, I think this particular case where Nintendo decides to ship out or develop with this particular framework where they only deliver up to a minimum set and then later on have to reinvent things for no good reason ends up causing the inconsistencies we see today. And so trailing through the list here, who has this problem? Obviously, as I've already outlined, it's the Splatoon developers, but really it's anyone who deals a hand in making into the official build as to what we see today. And so why should this problem be solved? In my mind, it's to lessen the inconsistencies and to stop the degradation of the game experience that we have in this game. And so that'll differ from person to person, sure, but I mean, it's one thing to just, at face value say, okay, every game has these problems, so why should we try to fix them, or why should we attempt to fix them, even though we have these problems, which probably every other game has, but that's not always the case. And I think in Splatoon's case, some of these issues kind of distinctively get involved. They sort of impact the game in a very special way. So how will I know this problem has been solved? Essentially, it's when the game stops having these random inconsistencies that, in my mind, are built in because of the framework they utilize to build the game up. And so what happens is we end up seeing things that, or experiencing things that shouldn't be in the game as it is. And ultimately this will differ from person to person, really, but in my mind it's when we stop having these inconsistencies, which I will cover now. And so the pain points basically try to outline or list, in my view, what I consider the pet peeves or major flaws that have developed in the game as it's progressed since Splatoon 1. And some of these have been an issue since Splatoon 1, but a lot of it I feel that they cover essentially the whole game set as it exists today. And so to just get into it, no dedicated servers. This might not be a surprise for some of you, but it's something I was expecting for this game, even if only after the rise of the online service kind of thing that Nintendo's doing now. But it hasn't been a thing, and so I'll get into that later on, but that's definitely something that I consider an issue. So going down the list, half-assed launch assets, post-launch assets. What this is trying to detail or cover is the things that we receive in the game at launch and what later comes to be after that point. This can be weapons, it can be stages, it can be alterations to existing game modes and things like that. So that's something that I think we should definitely touch up on later, and I will do so later. Going down, continuing, lack of choice and poor user experience. This is trying to detail on the small things where the player, the person, you, the customer, deals with when interacting with the game in smaller fashions, whether that's via a menu or what kind of things the game has you do, whether that's waiting for a particular thing to load, how easy it is to navigate in the game, and how it is to figure out things that are built into the game, right? So that's what I would want to try to focus on as far as user experience is concerned. And so going down the line, inconsistencies and unbalanced weapon ecosystem. And under parentheses I still have because this has been an issue since Splatoon 1, and they haven't fixed it for X, Y, Z reasons, and I don't know why, but it's definitely an issue. And again, this is probably one of those issues that exists in every shooter, and I can accept that. But Splatoon has its niche kind of really weird innovations that have made a good example as to what poor decisions can ultimately introduce into a game, if insisted upon and improperly maintained. And so again, I'll cover all these points in greater detail as we move forward, but to finish off this list, the game is still mainly independent. And yes, that is even with the standard hero mode and the Octo-Expansion and the very lackluster multiplayer LAN local play, whatever you want to call it. So these are essentially the points that I feel that make this game less fun for me. These are the things that I feel that cause a lot of discomfort, a lot of anger when I'm playing this game, because it just leads to a horrible experience. And because of this, I feel that it's essentially not really worth buying this game. It's not worth playing this game, and I feel that Nintendo still has a lot of room to make for this game to improve. So what I like to do now is to give my recommendations and my input as to how they can fix these particular issues that exist in the game, or to simply answer the question, what can they do about it? And so moving along, dedicated service fix, which is the first point that I outlined in my pain points slide, is, and my first recommendation here for them would be to, the logical thing is to invest in dedicated servers. But knowing Nintendo, and despite having now the paid for online service, Nintendo Switch Online, we still haven't seen this. And I'm just going to go on the assumption that Nintendo is never going to go with this, even though it would make a lot more sense. But so, and I guess, as I said, going under that assumption, my recommendation then would be for them to build with P2P and latency in mind. And so, for those of you who are not aware of what P2P is, if you look on the right hand side of this diagram, we see a bunch of computers where they have these black lines which represent connections where they're all connecting to each other. So what you would summarize from this is that, let's say that your Nintendo Switch console is essentially a computer in this diagram, and so the assumed setup for how Nintendo manages these online sessions, these online matches, is that it has everyone connect to each other. And what happens then is, if someone disconnects for ABC reasons, that disconnect either renders in the match as a glitch, as a way, as somehow perpetrates a disconnect for other players, or it disconnects with just one player. But the way this affects the match is pretty random, but it happens. And more importantly, it causes things to essentially fall through the roof, and so the integrity of the match is lost in this particular setup. And I don't know if Nintendo has ever admitted or briefed on how they set up or format these particular, or work the methodology for these online sessions where shooters are involved. But essentially, I think the consensus is that P2P does not make sense for shooter type games, especially a shooter type game like Splatoon that runs at 60 frames per second and is a fast paced type of shooter. And so I would happen to agree with that. I think we see a lot of random things happen online because of this, and the solution to many would be to simply invest in a dedicated server. On the left hand side, you have that kind of setup. In the middle, we have the dedicated server, which is just another computer. A computer that's owned by Nintendo that handles the integrity of the match. And so for a given match, your Nintendo Switch, or you, the player, your Nintendo Switch really would connect to a Nintendo server computer, and that computer then would manage the integrity of the match. So if someone would ever disconnect, that disconnect would then not adversely affect what gets shown to the other players for that particular match. And this is irrelevant of, or independent of the network conditions that could possibly exist. And this is why I say that Nintendo should build with P2P and latency in mind. Latency being lag, right? For those of you who are not aware of what that means, it's just a fancy word to dictate, or to essentially to say that lag is happening. So to me, what makes sense is to have a dedicated server setup, but if they're not willing to invest in that, the next thing would be to sensibly build with P2P the fact that the conditions are going to be different per area, per region, per country, and that they're going to be variable because of ABC reasons, right? You don't know why a disconnect happened. So, and they probably will still happen under the dedicated server setup, but it'll be much more controlled, and more importantly, the integrity of a match will be maintained regardless of the network conditions that exist per connection, per session, per player. Right? It won't matter. You'll only have rendered what actually makes sense to render based on what gets sent. And so to me that makes sense. But if you're not gonna if you're not gonna do that, then at least build your weapons, build your stages, build your game with all of that in mind. Taking into a fact that lag can happen, taking into into account that lag can happen, taking into account that particular weapons may be abused given the right circumstances, right, where a network condition may cause things to become adversely impacted. So to me, that's the sensible thing to do, and if they don't do that, then essentially what Nintendo's doing is they're giving everyone a middle finger, because they're not willing to accept the fact that the type of architecture that they use for online games, especially for online shooters, is critical towards the game experience and how the players excel given the right circumstances, right? Or even the circumstances that they're just given with, right? And so that's my recommendation there. Moving forward, development and assets fix. This is again pertaining to the things that are offered in the game at launch and what later gets developed, and that can pertain to weapons, stages, configurations, ability chunks, just being able to modify your avatar, your character, whatever that is. That's what I'm trying to center around here. And my first recommendation to Nintendo, is to be innovative but within reason. An example of what's good in terms of innovation is the Octo-Expansion. That's marvelous innovation. Another example is the customability we get for our weapons and our avatars. We get to be Octolings now. That's a very well thought, well executed, and well delivered innovation. What is not a good innovation, or better said, what is a good example of what it's a bad innovation or improperly introduced or needlessly introduced innovation, is the dualies. Dualies are essentially a weapon or weapon subclass that inherits the properties of traditional shooters and then gets the added ability of being able to dodge. And I think the only reason the Nintendo developers introduced this is because they figured, why not? Right? The reasoning, I feel, would be that they felt the need to balance out the fact that shooters or chargers, blasters, and rollers all got to essentially kill and splat players with only one shot. So I think this is the justification then for introducing the dualies, because shooters could not do that. But again, in my mind, this is like a handicap essentially, and that's all this is. It's a handicap for players who don't know how to play. And in my mind, if you don't know how to maneuver yourself against blasters, chargers, and rollers, then you don't know how to play the game. The developer shouldn't be inventing ways for you to win just because you don't know how to play. And again, why only give this to shooters? Are there really no blasters or chargers or rollers that couldn't have a dodge ability? I know a couple. I know a couple of the slow executing types that could benefit from having a dodge ability. So to me, this is an unfair bias given to a particular set of players that don't need this. This was never warranted. This was never asked for, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know who asked for this, but essentially what this is a handicap for a particular set of players where they don't need it because they already inherent pros of the traditional shooter, right? And they're only giving it to traditional shooter type weapons. It doesn't make sense. Another improper or unneeded innovation is the umbrella. My angst is not necessarily with the Sprat umbrella. I found this photo and I liked it, so I kept it and I put it in here. But my angst is with the undercover umbrella. And this umbrella is the umbrella that both defends, blocks, and shoots at the same time. And I didn't have a problem with the initial umbrella because the initial umbrella's execution style was either shoot or defend. Either shoot or defend. There was an opening. Now with this undercover umbrella, all of a sudden you're giving the player the choice, the opportunity to both defend and attack at the same time. Why? No other weapon class gets to do that. There are only a handful of players that get the splat shield type of sub-weapon. Right? That's not very dispersed among the weapon classes. So to introduce this kind of gimmick, again, to me, is only done in the form of a handicap for players that don't know how to play the game. I don't know why they felt the need to introduce these things when they're not going to pan out well. So to me, what should be done to amend these things, to better recognize these things, to better catch these outlier type of weapons that are essentially becoming really easy to abuse, is to do regression testing. And obviously, yes, they do some kind of testing because they're constantly patching this game, but it's not enough, obviously. There needs to be more done to fix this, right? Because it is a problem. And again, the argument is not that everything Nintendo introduces as an innovation in this game is wrong, right, or bad, right, or poorly executed. No, that's not the case being made. I don't mind Brellas as long as, they have proper configurations, right? They have proper stats, proper execution styles, right? All of that needs to make sense. I don't think it's a surprise that a handful of people were using the undercover umbrella in the tournaments that they recently had in North America and Japan, or in Japan and in the in the European regions for Splatoon, right? I saw a handful of teams and players using this weapon, and guess what? I think the argument made that the shield is weaker and thus makes the weapon more balanced only applies to select scenarios or circumstances. Circumstances where the umbrella type user is outmanned. But how often is that going to happen? And it's also ultimately going to depend on what weapons are facing off against that particular umbrella. Right? So if it's 1v1, you better have a really good weapon that can take down that shield. Otherwise, you have to wait or get pummeled by this particular weapon. I don't agree with that. I think there needs to be equal opportunity for both players, regardless of their weapon choice. Right? But we'll get into that later. But again, don't include things into the game that don't need to be put into the game otherwise. Right? Don't just put things in ad hoc just because you don't know what else to put. That's not proper. That's not worth paying $60 for. Next on the list, incorporate already existing mechanics into regular maps and stages. This is more of a request than anything because obviously those who have played the Splatfests and Splatoon have come to recognize that those are the most innovative types of stages found in the game, and I happen to agree with that. I like that those stages are really random, really dynamic, and they deserve every praise, and that's great. And the ranked iteration of stages found in the game also deserve praise because they introduce a lot of elements, a lot of designs, and they've received a lot of patches, I think, in the past, and as long as the game has been in existence. And I think that's great that they introduce these mechanics, these ink streams. They have a lot of more ink streams in ranked than turf, but it's nice having a lot of different mechanics in the stages because it's a lot more to work with. It doesn't give a particular group or weapon class an advantage against another, right? The playing field is balanced. And so what I like to see more then is that being introduced into regular or turf war iteration of stages. And it doesn't have to be overblown or oversaturated like in the Splatfest types of stages, but just like as we see here in Moray Towers, the first Splatoon iteration of Moray Towers did not have ink streams, but this Splatoon 2 did. They introduced these ink streams not only in the ranked iteration, but also the turf war regular battle iteration. And that, for me, I felt that was a well thought, well executed, well delivered type of innovation that was worth putting into the game because it really adds to the experience. Again, it doesn't give just one type of weapon class the advantage. It allows a particular player to take advantage of a particular circumstance, which again they could use to their advantage given the right circumstances, but it doesn't give just any, or better said, one select type of weapon class or team this one advantage. It could be anyone can use it. And to me, it adds to the stage because it's no longer static. And I believe this is my next point here, that the stages are not static. Right? They're not just the same old thing that we've been getting since Splatoon 1. And again, the argument some people would like to make is that that type of innovation should only or solely be left to the Splatfest types of stages. But I don't feel that that's fair. Right? If that were true, then why would they find the reason to include this ink stream in Moray Towers? And I think the ultimate example of what every stage could be is the stage found in Splatoon 1, which is Mahi Mahi Resort. And in that stage, halfway during a given match, the structures found on that stage morphed. Some of them elevated, some of them descended. And I feel that that really added to the whole experience. It was very dynamic. It kept it interesting. It wasn't, again, the same. And this is something that I'd like to see introduced, and more so in Turf War. And it could range from ink streams, it could range from invisible walls, it can range from man pipes or whatever you want to call them. It could be anything. I really don't care. I just don't want to see the same stuff being thrown into the game. I want more. I feel that we deserve more. I feel like it would make more sense to keep, to say that the game is more balanced. To do that, I feel that this is a strategy or something that can be done to achieve that, right? Don't let the maps or stages remain static. Have them be dynamic, even if it only happens after midway through a match. Introduce something new. Make it so that the users or the players can interact more with the stages, right? Utilize the stages more. It's not just the same old spotting this, spotting that, right? I feel that by doing so, they would then reduce that particular advantage a weapon may obtain if they never decide to patch a weapon, right? So it's better that way, I think. And I would definitely like to see that introduced. That's, again, a request more than a critique. But it'd be nice to have that. And so lastly, this is probably one of my bigger points here, but this is an issue that I've had since Splatoon 1, and by no means is Splatoon 2's rank system worse than Splatoon 1's, because as we all know, Splatoon 1's rank system was the worst. It was the worst thing I have ever seen in a game. And Splatoon 2's is better. Right? We have a better control for the select modes for ranked, and I think that's great. But it's the progress system is better, but it's still not justified, right? To me, a justified and meaningful and logical type of or well designed and delivered progress system in the game would be League. League has a straightforward meter, and it's not utterly bogus, unlike ranked. I think ranked will always remain broken the way it is until they adopt a better strategy for essentially they cannot determine a proper way to gauge progress for a player based on solely winning matches or losing matches, right? Because, and as we've already mentioned here, a player could lose a match for any reason. They could lose for weapons being the way they are, they could lose for lag, they could lose because a glitch happened, they could lose because of a disconnect, and yes, losses caused by disconnects are not counted as losses as far as I'm concerned, but I mean, just because a person doesn't disconnect doesn't mean a person who's in the match isn't doing anything. And I've had this happen time and time again, and I've had recordings of this where I clearly show a player, right, on my team ranked, and they're not doing anything, right? But the game, the server or whatever is involved considers them as playing in the game, right? So they consider them as though the match is operating normally, right? Nothing is abnormal. Nobody needs to be kicked. The person is still in the game, and so it considers that fair. But obviously, as I've already mentioned, that's not fair. And so because of all of these things, ultimately I feel that the rank system as it exists does not make sense. It does not have a proper way to gauge success. It does not have a proper progress system, and because of just the inherent flaws and because of how broken the game is just by default, there's no justification then to have the rank system behave the way it is. And a lot of people would argue that if the rank system were ever changed, that it would lose its competitive factor. But my argument then is, if that were true, League wouldn't be offered as the way it is, right? It would just be a port of ranked, and it would be different. But League is not that way. And let me tell you this, League is not less competitive than ranked. It's just as competitive in ranked, but it has a better progress system, right? And that's for damn sure. It has a much better progress system than ranked. And so my recommendation to Nintendo and the developers involved is that, hey, this is not working. I know it's not working. A lot of people know it's not working. Your game is not perfect. If you're not going to fix the fact that there are inherent flaws into how the game is managed and maintained as far as online and inherent mechanics are built into the game, right? If you're not going to fix that, then there's no reason to have the ranked system or progress system the way it is, because it's unjustified. There's no clear basis for why someone deserves to rank up, and there's neither a basis for why someone deserves to get ranked down. And especially not the way that Nintendo handles it right now, because what happens is if you get ranked down, you not only lose your rank, but you get points deducted or progress deducted from the rank you're ranking down to. So it's almost double fold to the penalty that they're administrating to you. And to me, it's ridiculous, because if that's the case, then people who either rank up or rank down, could be recently coming up or rightfully coming down, and then people who end up playing with those people are either playing with people who are not up to that rank or up to that particular experience or what have you. And a lot of this is attributed to the fact that this game lets you skip ranks. And sometimes it could be for good reason, and sometimes it could not be for good reason. It all depends. I don't know what they use to administer that. I don't know what algorithm they use to manage that. But it's not working. It's broken. It doesn't leave proper justification to, demote someone, right? It does not. In no way does it. And contrary to that argument people seem to make, it would not make the game less fun. It would not leave ranked less competitive, because if that were the case, League wouldn't have a reason to exist. League exists fine the way it is, and it's still competitive. So my recommendation to Nintendo is for them to either port over the progress system, or yet again remodify the current rank system, whether that's the progress system or whatever the hell it is, whatever algorithm they're using. They need to fix it, because right now it's broken, and they have no reason to keep it the way it is, because it's not fair. And obviously, with the changing environment the way it is, and again, they're constantly patching things. They find bugs every now and then, right? Lag happens. Network conditions are never perfect. Yet again, we have players that are in the match but then don't do anything. We have teams who just apparently squid partying is a thing, so they throw the match. And this happens, yes, in ranked mode. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. You better believe it does. I'll admit it happens a lot more in ranked, or in turf war and salmon run than it does, or salmon run than it does in rank, but it still happens. It still happens. And so basically what they leave you is you have to be really lucky to progress in rank. And for me, that's stupid. Why? Why do I have to be lucky? Shouldn't it be based on skill? And if on skill, are the circumstances that are leading to that, or gogging that, are the means properly delivered, right? Is it equal footing all around, or is there a team that has 3 blasters or 3 chargers or 3 rollers in one go, right? So you have to take all these things into consideration and then formulate a proper progress system. Otherwise, you wind up with a shitty system like ranked, which, mind you, is not something I see in any shooter currently existing today. And I think it's for good reason, because it doesn't work. League is fine the way it is. I think I would appreciate a solo league, because currently the way rank exists is bullshit. It's broken matchmaking. Matchmaking in this game is already poor, so I don't need something shittier than that to enable me to have fun based on luck, right? So fix it, because it deserves to be fixed. I'm not paying $60 for shit. Moving on, user experience fix. First point here is remove lag from menus and add skip options. So a sequence in this game where users or players, the customer, is needlessly forced to wait for the game to do something would be the initial startup sequence where Pearl and Marina explain or give the user information for which they can already yet again find via other means, faster means in the game built in. And so to me, I feel that it's okay to have this, initial startup sequence, but it's not okay to not then give the player, the customer, the person, the player, right? The person, an option to skip that if they don't want to listen to that. Because again, they could find the same information faster via a different menu. So this is something that they don't do. And again, I don't mind that they keep it in the game. Fine. The first time that we play the game or start the game ever, fine. Have that sequence run. But after that, give us the option to skip. And by skip, I do not mean skip like this. Right? So I've been in a case, this is not my photo, but I've been in the case where I've skipped out on the game for like 5 months, come back, accidentally for whatever reason visited Sheldon's shop, and he's gone through this effort to supply me his monologue of the information containing the new weapons. And what happens is Nintendo has offered a skip option, but it's not really a skip option, it's a fast forward button. And this fast forward, depending on how long you've skipped out on the game for and for how many new weapons have been introduced into the game during that time, might not be all that different from just sitting it out. So to me, this is a useless kind of design flaw that doesn't need to be in the game. Why force the person, why force the player to sit through things they shouldn't need to sit through? Again, it's fine to have this executed the first time anyone ever plays the game. Fine. That adds to the identity of the game. Good. Fine. I don't mind that being in there. But don't force me to sit through it every damn time I play the game. Right? Give the user the choice. Give the user the options to do what they should be able to do given the right circumstances, right? And in this case, do not needlessly force them to sit through stuff they don't need to force through, for which they can get the information from via faster, quicker, and more natural means. Test menu navigation with users. So this point is again trying to address or remediate the fact that Nintendo obviously doesn't really test this all the way around. They should, and this could apply even to the P2P kind of setup we mentioned before, but or even just for whatever it could be. But the proper thing for them to do is to test, and to test why is because conditions and approvals or assumptions made from a particular test in a given country or time or period with select sample sizes or select people only represent so much, right? They can only represent so many people. So for me, again, what's okay maybe in one country may not be okay for people in another country. So again, I don't know how Nintendo tests their stuff. I don't know how Nintendo tests their development, their designs, their mock-ups, their prototypes for these games. I don't know what they do. But they're not doing well enough, because I feel they're not testing all the way around. They're not testing with enough samples. They're not testing with the right samples, and they're not testing what I feel that they're not even really properly defining what it is they need to be testing when they do the testing, right? And in this case, it would be simple. Can the user navigate to this particular part of the game with ease, with fluidity? Is it natural to them to figure out how to get to this? Did we show them how to do this? Right? Does it make sense to force a person or user a customer to sit through a particular sequence that's redundant and needlessly redundant? No, it isn't. So test for that. Test for that better. Third point here, give users, gamers more options to choose from. I list this point because it's more of a recognition as well as a recommendation, or I guess it's a little of it's like a midway acknowledgement and critique at the same time, right? Because the game, this Splatoon 2 has given us a lot more options, a lot more choices than the first game. And I think that's well warranted, that's well accepted, that's well received, and it deserves praise. Great. But give us more of that. Again, give the user the choices that they expect to have. Give them choices or options where it makes sense to give them that. People like having options. That's not a secret. That's a strategy, right? It makes sense to do that. Give us more hairstyles. Give us more clothings. Right? Give us more customizations. Give us more races even. Right? Maybe you can go beyond Octo-Links. But people like having those choices. So why not give it to them? This point here, let users, gamers choose maps, is more of a request than anything. But in my view, and because of the games and the other shooters that I've played aside from Splatoon, I've never seen a negative outcome because of this. And I think the worry that people have is that because the game only starts with so many number of stages, that it would become essentially you would run into a situation where only a select stage or map would be selected per a given session. And I agree with that. I think if games and designs are improperly set up to allow that to happen, then yes, it's a poor decision to implement. It's a poor design to implement. But that is if it's improperly designed and improperly implemented. Now, if you properly allocate the proper maps, if you properly introduce what needs to be introduced, you wouldn't run into this problem. And again, a lot of this has to do with the fact that Nintendo decides to only ship with the minimum amount of stuff for this game at launch. And fine, that's fair, but later on, when we get like 10, 16 maps or stages in the game, why limit them to 2? If you can do what you do in Splatfest and release more than 2 and say 3, where at least the third option is random, why not do that? Again, give the user the choice. Give the user the options where it makes sense to give them those options. I don't see a negative side down or a downside to this. In fact, I expect this to happen in the next game. And if they don't, then I'm gonna wonder why, because it doesn't make sense. It only adds to the user experience. People feel utility in having those options where they should have those options. Lastly, let users/gamers leave matches from any point in time. This is a recommendation because users and players continue to leave the match regardless of the deterrent. For those of you who are not aware, Nintendo now issues a penalty if a particular player disconnects from a match, whether that's on purpose or whether that's just because they lose the connection. So ultimately, it could be for any reason, and Nintendo has no way to find out why that happened. It could have been an emergency. It could have been a network issue that's beyond the player's control. It could have been their internet connection, right? It could have been anything. It could have been a power outage. It could have been any reason, but Nintendo feels it's then justified to enable a penalty, right, on this player because rage quitting is, it's not acceptable, but even if you didn't rage quit, it doesn't matter, we're going to penalize you anyway. So that's currently Nintendo's standpoint on this, and I think it's very arrogant, it's a lack of oversight, and it's improperly implemented. I don't mind the deterrent, but the deterrent needs to make sense for all cases. If you're just going to do it for one particular group set or user set, then that's not fair. The people who got disconnected for ABC reasons for which they had nothing to do with rage quitting don't deserve to get that penalty. And so for me, the answer to that then would be to let users and the gamers leave the match at any point. And a lot of people have a aversion for this because they say that the match only runs for so long that doing this would only enable more people to leave more often and essentially leave matches very rigged. And I agree to that, but it's no different than what's happening now. So people are still leaving regardless of this deterrent. And my argument then is that if they're not going to let them leave at any point, even during a match, then let them leave from more areas than they are now. So whether that's in a room lobby or whether that's after the match, it needs to be, more frequent, that they need to be given that option where they're allowed to leave. Even if it's not during the match, fine. But make it more frequent, right? Make it so that's not just after, make it so that's also before. Right? Again, because there are cases where people are left waiting in a room where the timer resets for random reasons. People are leaving, and then I've actually sat through situations where the timer has reset like 3 times, and then for whatever reason the server could not find a player to add to the lobby or to the room, and then I've had to just wait there. I waited for like 5-10 minutes because the server couldn't find anyone. Those situations happen, and again, if you properly tested, you would take that into consideration, right? You would take that in consideration when you were building the game, when you were adding these options, when you were giving the player the choice to leave, right? And so to me, it doesn't make sense to run under the assumption that the ideal conditions are always going to exist, because they're not. And more importantly, Nintendo has no way of knowing that these conditions exist at all. So the deterrent will only ever go so far. So for me, the proper solution to rage quitting is to just let people leave when they want to leave, because they're going to do it whether you want it or not, and more importantly, you don't know why in particular disconnected. So implementing a penalty does not work against all people, against all disconnects. So it just doesn't work. It's a broken approach to a broken problem, and it's inherent. So whatever Nintendo decides to do there from here, I mean, honestly, I don't care if they keep the deterrent in there. I understand why they're doing it. It's just, it doesn't make sense. Again, because Nintendo has no way of knowing why someone disconnected. So moving forward, weapon ecosystem. This is a very heated topic because people get very defensive about what's included in the game and what's not included in the game. And so my first point here is nerf OP weapons completely or seclude them to Salmon Run. Secluding them to Salmon Run is something they're already doing with the Grisco weapons, and solely because there's no equivalent Grisco weapon for a particular weapon or weapon class in the game doesn't mean there doesn't currently exist a weapon in the game that acts or behaves or comes close to the stats that would be achieved by the Grisco weapon. An example of that is the Octo-Brush. The Octo-Brush is a weapon that I've used before, and it's a weapon that I consider to be OP because it's easy to abuse. It only requires 3 splats, and that's under, base conditions. What if, it's 3v1 and that brush is under the multiple group against that one player? Well, it becomes very easy to abuse. In my mind, because brushes already inherit their own properties, giving the extra buff and fluff onto this weapon is unnecessary. I've never found this weapon fair. I've never found it balanced, and I think it needs to be removed or secluded to Salmon Run because it's a very, very bullshit weapon, and it doesn't exist properly the way it should. And so moving down the line, a way to find these weapons, to recognize that these weapons exist, is to do regression testing. It's very simple. Test with people. Test this out before you deploy it. it makes sense. Right? It's very easy to spot weapons that are easy to abuse. I've used some of them. I can admit to using some of them. I have the balls to admit that they even exist in the game. Some people don't want to admit that because they're hesitant, either for pride or out of worry that the weapon will be removed from the game altogether. I'd rather have it that the weapon was removed altogether, because ironically it's these weapons that are making the game worse. So protecting them will not make the game experience better. It's what's making the game worse. It's making the game inconsistent. It's breaking the game. So down, limit sub special per main. Do not create all-in-ones. What's an all-in-one, you ask? An all-in-one for me is a weapon like the splatter shot that's been given the burst bomb as a sub, and don't remember what its special is, but that particular subset is a weapon that I have used, right? I've used the splatter shot. I've also used this variant with the splat bomb. I think it's a very accommodating sub. I don't know why they felt the need to introduce a very accommodating sub where the main is already really powerful. And again, I don't get why they feel the need to do this. I can understand that the game only comes with a certain number amount of weapons at launch. Fine. That does not then give you justification to create subsets where a main or a sub or a special are accommodating too well for a particular main. An example of that would be the Octo-Brush or Splatter Shot. I use the Splatter Shot. I think that the Burst Bomb is way too accommodating for a shooter type weapon like that, where the Splatter Shot already gets a high fire rate, medium damage, and very decent range. Right? It's way too good. Why? Essentially what they've done is they've turned that weapon into a makeshift charger. And to me, that's bullshit. That doesn't need to exist in the game. There are already improper inconsistencies in the game the way they are. Do not make it worse by introducing subsets for weapons or systems, weapon sets for weapons where the main is already really, really good. Another example of that would be the NZAP. The NZAP has an incredible fire rate. It has a very distinct spread, and it has a decent range. It's not a crazy range, but it's decent. It's a very powerful main, and yet the improper thing is to then give them a very accommodating sub. An example of that is the weapon set that has the suction bomb. Why? That's the strongest bomb in the entire game. Why does that main need that type of sub? To me, what would make sense for that main, again, this is a weapon that I use the NZAP frequently. And I don't understand why they felt the need to give this, again, handicap to people in the game where it isn't necessary to do so. This does not balance the game out. This does not balance the weapon ecosystem. You're causing inconsistencies to happen. You're allowing players to abuse the game via these inherent flaws. It's stupid. An NZAP should only have a minimal, accommodating type of sub or special. Do that. Do that because it makes sense to do that. Don't just add in crap because you don't know what else to add in. An NZAP at most should have either a sprinkler or a mine. That's it. I use the variant with the auto bomb, and even I think the auto bomb is a bit too advantageous. It gives a bias, right? It gives too much advantage to a particular player where they don't need that advantage, right? You're giving them a handicap where they don't need that handicap. Why do this? Why? I keep questioning that in my head, and I don't have a freaking good answer, aside from the fact that they just did it for why not. They didn't have a good reason to introduce it, but they did it anyway. So to me, my recommendation there, my solution there is to just not do that. Limit it. An NZAP should not have an auto bomb. An NZAP should not have a suction bomb. An NZAP at most can have or should have either a beacon or the mist subtype, or even the the mine, right? The mine. Those are subtle. Those are not significantly impactful or accommodating for an NZAP. I feel that's appropriate. That's why when the first game gave it the sprinkler, I was like, alright, it doesn't explode. That's fair. Because my main is already really, really good. That's fair. And they've reintroduced that in the latest update. And they've given another variant for the NZAP where it has the sprinkler and the rain special. And I felt that, okay, it's kind of fair now. It's better than what they had before, but again, don't release weapon sets that are way too advantageous, way too easy to abuse. I've said this before and again. Third or fourth point, contain weapon spec stats within class domains. What this is trying to detail is that essentially I feel that there are certain weapons that try to stretch the boundaries as to what is properly determined for a particular weapon class. And so for me, that's a charger is supposed to get long range but has the lowest fire rate. That makes sense. Roller is kind of in between, but it has a particular way of executing. It shouldn't need the range of a charger. Likewise, a shooter shouldn't need the range of a charger because it has a particular coverage, high fire rate, and a really good range. It shouldn't have the range of a charger because if that's going to be your aim, you should use a charger. Use a charger for the range. Otherwise, you shouldn't be introducing weapons that have these particular traits, behaviors, and attributes that mix them in with other type of weapon classes. That shouldn't be a thing because again, you're then introducing these irregularities with flawed weapons already in the game where weapon sets are being created that are too advantageous to a particular type of weapon class, etc., etc. Why do that? Why give these people these things that nobody asked for? I don't know who asked for a weapon that a traditional shooter that has the range of a charger. I don't know who asked for a blaster that has a fire rate of a traditional shooter. I don't know who asked for a charger with the fire rate of a traditional shooter. I don't know who asked for a roller with the execution style or a execution rate of a traditional shooter. Why? Why introduce these flawed types of, or these irregular types of weapons into the game? Again, they don't balance the game. They make it more imbalanced. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help people get better at the game, in my view. You're introducing handicaps so that people learn how to abuse the game, right? Abuse the things that are found in the game. So to me, these weapons aren't helping anyone, right? They're making the game worse, they're making the experience worse, and they only cause more problems as they continue to be released. So, lastly, do not include unique classes or unfair abilities for a single class. Again, as we've already touched up on earlier, I don't understand why dualies only have the dodge ability, and I also don't understand why umbrellas need to exist as the only class with a shield. The answer to that would be to come out with more or distinct weapons and weapon sets that solely have this dodge ability that are not excluded from that particular trait. So in the next game I expect to have blasters and rollers with a dodge ability. I expect more splat shields subs to be dispersed across the classes better and more so than they are now. I think that would make it fair. I think that would be reasonable considering you're coming out with a weapon class, a weapon that has a built-in attribute that is, again, unfairly distributed, needlessly introduced for no right reason, essentially. So, again, to me, to wrap this section up, if they're not willing to remove weapons or seclude weapons to Salmon Run, they need to test better to make sure that they then patch the weapons that are becoming really easy to abuse. The simple fix would obviously be to seclude them or remove them altogether, but if they're not willing to do that, then fix them. Fix them so that they're not easy to abuse. Again, these are weapons that I use. I'm not being biased here, I'm being objective. It's really easy to abuse a lot of these weapons. It's really easy. So fix them, because it's broken. It's not making the game fun. It's making the game more less fun. So fix it. Moving on. Offline gameplay fix. This is my last section here, and this is going to cover essentially the fact that the game is very online dependent. To me, a fix to that would be to simply offer something that already exists in the game, something for which there's already laid down infrastructure. All they would have to do is port over Salmon Run and make a solo Salmon Run type option. And this is something people have already done unofficially. And I don't know if Nintendo ever patched this, but it's something that's well worth considering, well worth implementing, because it's something people like to do. It's a game mode that I personally enjoy very much. And it's something people obviously want to be able to get, even if it's just solo, because it's a PvE type of game mode. And why not? Again, people like having those options. After a certain point, the hero mode and the Octo-Expansion, despite the Octo-Expansion's great innovation, very awesome type levels, they get repetitive after a certain point, and the local LAN option only works if you have more than one Switch, so that's not always going to be an option. So, to me, the simple fix, the simple solution would be to simply port over Salmon Run. Port it over. It's so simple. The next point is more of a request that I don't expect to see, but was, I put that on the list because I've seen the AI improve a lot, and I felt that it was worth acknowledging that it's made a significant improvement since the last game, and it's just incredible. It's awesome how great the AI has become in this game, and I think that's great. I think that's really, really good. I think it would be interesting to find a solo multiplayer type of mode where it's not required to have another Switch console, and where it's again a PvE almost. It would be interesting to have that, but it's not a requirement for me. I don't really care if they add this in, but I would definitely focus on having a solo Salmon Run, if not else, right? Keep the trial-based levels in game. This is an acknowledgement to the Octo-Expansion. I felt that the Octo-Expansion reinvented the whole hero story campaign type of thing in this game, and it did so well. It introduced these trial-based levels that were very dispersed, very diverse in how you tackled them on, and it did an excellent job at doing that. The people who worked on that deserve every bit of praise because it was well done. It was well received as well, and I think rightfully so, because it didn't do the same kind of crap that we got from the initial hero mode, which was basically an extended tutorial according to some people, and I feel that it was, in a sense, very redundant to what we got from the first game. It was the same kind of thing where you run around a particular stage inking stuff and then finding stuff and either defeating stuff, and that was it. But no, the Octo-Expansion built off of that. It went to other lengths. It offered different type of objectives, right? And it was a lot more distinct in what it offered, and I liked that. I think they should keep that going. It's something that I wouldn't mind they kept bringing into the game. Do not make story campaign and extended tutorial. I already mentioned this, but it's a critique on what we received at launch, and I feel that the Octo-Expansion now is the new status quo for what's expected as far as campaigns or stories in the game, if they decide to come out with a new game. And so, with all that said and done, essentially that was my last section. But so what I would expect to see from the next game, if they decide to come out with the next game, is the following. And this is if they should only ever follow one point of advice that I've listed here. But to me, a game worth paying $60 for that's coming from Nintendo, and that's Splatoon, is a game that comes with fewer play inconsistencies / imbalances. That means having weapons that make sense to have under the general or assumed low connections, low bandwidth connections, not ideal conditions existing throughout the world, lag happening, right? So there's no bias or advantage given to players where there's no lag suffering, or where there's weapons that are easy to abuse given certain circumstances. There's no weapons that are by themselves really OP. There's no weapon sets that are breaking the laws of what's allowed for a particular weapon class. There's no weapon sets that are then easy to abuse regardless of map, stage, play status, matchmaking, etc. Right? All this crap needs to be fixed if I'm gonna pay for the next game. That's my requirement there. And if they're not gonna follow anything else, fix ranked mode. Because if they're not gonna fix ranked mode, then at least fix the weapons. And if you're not gonna fix the weapons, then at least fix ranked mode, because they're all both dependent on each other. Second, complete a game that isn't online dependent. To me, this has been less relevant as time has progressed, because a lot of people are connecting online, and a lot of companies are offering games that are solely online based. And I'm fine with that, as long as you then offer a way for people to play the game even when they're offline. And again, the hero story in Octo-Expansion only work to a point until it becomes ultimately very repetitive. So the answer to that would be to offer a solo salmon run, which is very dynamic. It's unpredictable, and it doesn't always get boring every single dang time. Let the person choose the map. Let the person choose their weapons, right? But offer it so that it's not solely online dependent. That's important for moving forward. That's important for a game that's worth $60. User-centered design development. Again, cater to the user. Always focus to the user. Make sure you're not making them sit through stuff that they don't need to be sitting through, or experiencing things they don't need to be experiencing. Make sure that the weapons are well thought out. Make sure that you're not giving in to too much temptation, or to too much you're not willing to deliver handicaps for players, right? Think it through for the user, right? Put yourself in their shoes. Give yourself the perspective from their perspective. Do it that way, right? Don't just give yourself a pat in the back and think that whatever you're introducing into the game is going to be well accepted, and if it isn't, then fix it, amend it. Option for that is just to remove it, right? You have that prowess. You have that right. You have that control over the game. So do it, right? Do it. Do not degrade the user experience. Give people the options where it makes sense to give them that options. And lastly, be continuous. Continuously update the game as you have been. But do not do it in the shill, minimal effort form that you have for the past two games, right? Deliver us more. Give us more at start. Give us more at launch. Do not give us such a shitty run at the game from the get-go, right? Do more. Continuously want to be better. Continuously take input, right? Continuously take the feedback that's required to keep the game alive, right? Otherwise, people are not going to be wanting to buy this game. People are not going to be wanting to buy anything Nintendo comes out with if you don't take the proper feedback. That's the whole point. That's how you get better. That's how games get better. Otherwise, it's always the same crap. Time after time, disc after disc, installment after installment. It's the same crap. Nobody wants that. That's boring. And yeah, a lot of people are going to say that's basically what Mario Kart is, but you know what? That's a whole different type of game. This is a shooter, my friends, and this is more importantly Splatoon. So, out of all of this, this is what I expect to see in the next game. This is what I expect to see at a minimum, right, in the next game. Whether that's bare minimum, or only 3 out of 4, or 2 out of 4, or 1 out of 4. This is what I expect to see in the next game, if I am to buy it. Otherwise, Nintendo can accept my middle finger. I'll give them the bird happily, and I'll never buy the game again, because it's a trash game that's broken from the beginning. It's basically flawed from the get-go. It's flawed in terms of the weapon ecosystem. It's flawed in its progress in its game modes, and it doesn't make sense all the way around. And I'm severely disappointed in how little it's improved as far as those things go. But again, that's not to say that the game doesn't have its ups sides, or it doesn't. It does. It obviously has its silver linings. It has its improvements. It has its pros. It has its particular tidbits where it does shine. I've already outlined those, but that wasn't the point of this presentation. And I hope the developers or the people who got note of this or wind of this took some of these things into consideration, because quite honestly, and again, it's important to accept that there are things that you can always improve on, and it's true for anything. It's true for any product, and this is no different. So for me, this makes sense. For me, it makes sense to admit to the fact there are things that you can do better. There are things that you sort of didn't implement full oversight on, or things you didn't really see from a different perspective. But the important thing after that then is to then amend those particular things that are worth amending. And to me, these are things that are worth amending. And it's not just me, it's the community. If you go online, you'll find these exact arguments, discussions being made anywhere. You'll find it on game discussions, on game boards, on discussion boards, whatever the hell you go and you look for Splatoon as a discussion, you'll find these exact points, the exact issues being outlined again and again and again, and it's for good reason. It's because it doesn't work. It's broken. It needs to be fixed. These are issues, and they do need to be fixed, right? So please, I'm begging the developers, just freaking take it into consideration. It's so simple. I've already outlined what you can do, or I've outlined the issues that you have. I've outlined some recommendations for what you can do. It's up to you then to take it from there. And it's so simple how to do that. It's so simple. It's very simple. All you have to do is be willing to change, right? Willing to change the things that are worth changing. And so with that said, this pretty much concludes this presentation. So if you learned something, then I'm happy, and if you didn't, then I'm sorry. Again, this is made in hopes that someone from Nintendo would look at it and take it into consideration and really just gain the perspective and the insight that some of us in the community do have for this game. And my hope then is that some change, some form of change does happen further on and later on. And so again, yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say. So again, if my pace was a little slow, then I'm sorry. I tried my best here, but again, this is something that I feel that's been coming for a long time, and I finally got around to doing it, and so I'm glad I did. And I'll be coming out with more presentations, and this time it'll be on recommendations and critiques for the game, the player base, because I feel that it's something worth mentioning all around. And so again, with that said and done, I'd like to thank you all for listening in, tuning into this very agitated, very amateurish, impromptu presentation / briefing. Yeah, so I hope you learned something, and I guess I'll see you in the next one. Thanks.